Hello everyone, my name is Dave Partner and welcome to your 7th Node.js tutorial. In this tutorial, we'll be looking at something called events. Okay, the idea is this. Node.js makes heavy use of events, callbacks, observers. Alright, and that makes it very fast and very powerful. So I'll try to explain what each of them does, and then we see an example so you understand. Okay, what you can observe is that Node.js always makes use of events. So whenever a task is completed, an event is fired. Okay, for instance, if you try to read a file, once your file reading is completed, Node.js fires an event called onEnd. Okay, so that the callback functions are called when an asynchronous function returns its result. So you are reading a file here and you just finished reading a file, and the event end is called, and this callback function takes over. So this is where you put a function that says, hey, once you finish reading this file, this is the other thing you can execute. So you can write your own custom codes right here in the callback functions. Alright, the observers are basically listening for events to complete, to get fired. So these guys are just waiting for this guy to get fired. This guy is just waiting for this guy to get completed. So when this guy is waiting and observe that, hey, an event is fired, then it starts working. This one is waiting for an event to complete and pass the data, the values to it. So this is just the difference. Alright, when you start a Node.js server, what happens is that Node.js declares your variables for you. All the variables in your script, in your code, it declares all of them, initializes all your functions, then it simply waits. Node.js has something called an event loop. So once you have your Node.js app started, there is a big loop running in the background, just waiting for an event to fire. A very big loop. Okay, so once that's the observers. So once you fire on your server, your Node.js server, it declares the functions, declares the variables, initializes the functions, and just waiting for an event to occur. So these observers are just waiting for an event to occur. So once an event occurs, it waits. Once the event occurs, it waits for it to complete, then it triggers the callback. Alright, so let us go and write a couple of codes to really visualize what we just explained. I'll minimize this, then I'll go to our favorite folder, and let's create another random file and call it what do we call this? Event something. Events testing.js. You can just call it anything. So, but this is just for tutorial purposes. And what we'll first do is let's import the module. Import our events module, or whatever the spelling is. We can just call it events, declare the variable, and then remember how we import modules. You simply require the module's name, events, that's the name of the module. Then there is something called an event emitter. Emitters help you to fire events. Okay, so event emitter, this variable could be anything. I just named it event emitter. So we have new event emitter, just like that. Alright, the next thing you want to do, we need to bind events to their emitters. Okay, we need to bind it to their handler. So after declaring these two, we just come here and say, hey, let's create an event handler. So we can just name it any variable. Let's call this connect handler 1 and say, hey, what you should basically do, we declare a function on it and maybe do something inside. We'll just print something random inside it and say successfully connected. That's all we want to do inside it. Then we can also try to fire some other event from inside here. Or whatever event we choose. So let's use the event emitter for the first time. We have event emitter dot emit. That is how to fire an event manually. Data received. Just know that assuming we are trying to read a file, the events, there are some custom events or default events that will fire themselves by themselves. But here we are trying to fire a custom event manually. So this is how to fire a custom event manually by yourself. So we call it a data received event. Alright, the next thing we can do is we'll bind the event connection with the handler, which is basically listen. So let's listen or bind the event connection with the handler. So what happens is we have event emitter dot on connection. Oops, we need to copy this and have it right inside here. So on connection, once the connection event is fired, that's what we're saying. Hey, listen until, or observe. This is an observer. Observe once the connection event is fired. This is the function to run. The name of the function to run is connect handler 1. Do you now get what is happening? We have declared a function that we called connect handler 1. That's what we named our function. And we're now saying, hey, listen until whenever a connection event is fired. We have not created this connection event, but once it's fired, quickly run the function or whatever you see here. Alright, so that takes us to the next line where we'll have we will listen to some other event emitter dot on data received oops, am I getting the spelling? This is what I want to write here. On data received, once the data received event is fired, remember we are firing this guy here. So once the program gets to here and fires a data received event, we are listening, we are waiting for this to happen here. So once this one is fired, this is what you do for us. You perform this function. This is what you will do. Basically print out something on the console .log, and we can say data receive event fired successfully, or whatever you want to print. Then finally what we will do is we need to fire an event to kick off everything. we can call it event emitter dot on, which is basically dot emit, which is basically fire an event called connection, and finally tell us the last console dot log, and we can say end of program. So I'll quickly explain what we have here and then we'll run it. As you can see, we declare the first variable, which is basically require an event module, and then we declare the second variable, which is we are calling a class inside the event module called event emitter. Event emitters help us to do two major things, which is fire an event and observe for when an event is fired. Two things. Alright, then remember I told you about callback functions. Callback, this is an example of a callback function. Callback functions receive data from events and work it out. They receive data from events and decide what to do, whatever program you write inside. Alright, so we declared the function and did something inside and saved it in a variable. If you're observant, you see that so far nothing has happened. We're just declaring variables and what they mean. And then here we are listening for when an event is fired. The name of the event we are waiting for is connection. Once it's fired, the program will run this whatever code we have here, and the code we have here is right here, and it will just print console.log successfully connected. In this next line, we are waiting for an event again, which is we are observing or listening for an event called data received. Once it's fired, this will happen. Okay, remember this, inside this function, this is where it's getting fired. Event emitter.emit fires an event called data received, and here we're waiting and we're saying, hey, once you notice that this has been fired, this is what you'll do. Okay, so the program basically declares all this and gets to this point. In this next point, what it's saying is, hey, fire an event called connection. Alright, so as you can see, this is the first time we are actually firing an event that is not in a variable. So this program basically runs through this and does nothing until it gets here. When it gets here, it fires an event. Bang! The event's name is connection. And since this guy has been listening for connection, once it fires, this guy says, hey, connection event has been fired. So execute this function. So the first thing we will see is successfully connected, and then this other event is fired. Bang! So since this guy is listening for data received, he says, hey, data received has been fired, so do this. Once this is done, then we proceed and come back here and end program. So that is it. So let's run it and see whether it will print in the order we described, and then I hope hopefully that will explain events, event emitters, observers, and callbacks to you. Alright, so we open our favorite Node.js prompt, and then the name of our file is events testing.js. So all we'll do is node events testing.js. Then we'll hit enter and wait. So let's compare the results. As you can see, successfully connected, that is what we have here. Data received events fired successfully, that is what we have here. And finally end of program, just like I explained. So let me run through it one more time. We declare this variable, but this time this variable is a function, but still a variable. Nothing has happened so far. Then we come here and listen for when an event will happen. So far it has not been fired, so nothing happens. We'll come here and listen for when an event is fired, called data received. So far nothing happens since it has not been fired. But then we come here and actually fire an event called connection. So once we fire it, since this guy has been listening, this guy says, hey, since connection has been fired, perform this function, execute this, and the program quickly look through your program to find this guy, and this guy is here, and quickly executes successfully connected, and also fires this event. And this guy, since this event is fired and this guy has been listening, this other function gets executed before this guy works.